$100 million hidden in a basement, left behind by a family that never said a word. Before I tell you how it all unfolded, let me show you the moment that changed everything. A man on his knees, covered in dirt, hands shaking, staring at something that should not have been there, a rusted metal door, bolted shut. Beneath a house nobody wanted. This is that story. And trust me, the ending will make your jaw drop. The winter of 1984 hit northern Minnesota like a punishment. Snow buried roads, froze pipes, and kept most people locked inside their homes from November through March. It was in the middle of that brutal season, February to be exact, that Raymond Calloway got the phone call. His grandmother, Eleanor Calloway, had passed away at 83 years old in her sleep, in the same farmhouse she had lived in since 1951. Raymond had not spoken to her in over 6 years. Not out of hatred, just out of distance. Life had taken him to Chicago, to a modest apartment, to a warehouse job that paid just enough to keep the lights on. Eleanor had stayed behind in Duluth, stubborn and silent as the iron ore country around her. Raymond was 31 when he got that call. He had $11 in his checking account. His truck had a cracked windshield and bald tires. He owed 3 months of back rent to a landlord who had already slid 2 warning notices under his door. Raymond Calloway was the kind of broke that doesn't announce itself. It just quietly crushes you, day after day, until you forget what breathing freely even feels like. He almost didn't go. His co-worker, a heavy-set man named Dennis Pruitt, was the one who pushed him. They were on break, drinking bad coffee from a vending machine when Raymond told him about the call. Dennis looked at him like he was out of his mind. "Your grandma died and left you a house, and you're sitting here drinking this garbage coffee," Dennis said. "Raymond, go." So Raymond went. The drive from Chicago to Duluth in February is not something a man does for fun. 8 hours through grey skies and salt-covered highways, with a heater that worked only when it felt like it. He arrived at the property on a Tuesday afternoon just before dark. The farmhouse sat back from the road behind a row of leafless birch trees, and it looked exactly like what it was, an old woman's home that had not been touched by renovation since the Eisenhower administration. The porch boards were soft. The windows had plastic sheeting on the inside. The front door required Raymond to shoulder it open because the wood had swollen in the cold. Inside, it smelled like mothballs and something else, something older, harder to name, like soil, like time. Raymond stood in the living room for a long moment, looking at the crocheted blankets on the chairs, the framed photographs on the walls, the ancient television set with rabbit ears draped in aluminum foil. He felt something in his chest that he hadn't expected. Grief, maybe, or something closer to guilt. He had not been here when she needed company. He had told himself it was because of money and distance. But standing there in her house, in her silence, he knew the truth was simpler and less flattering than that. He spent the first night on her couch, wrapped in one of her blankets, listening to the wind come off Lake Superior and rattle the windows. He had no plan. The county had already told him there was no will on record, which meant the house transferred to him as next of kin. He figured he'd clean it out, maybe sell it for whatever a rundown farmhouse in Duluth could get in 1984, not much, and use the money to dig himself out of the hole back in Chicago. That was the plan. The plan lasted exactly 2 days. On his 3rd morning there, Raymond decided to start in the basement. He had avoided it. The door was in the kitchen, a low wooden frame painted the same off-white as the walls, with a simple hook latch. He unlatched it, pulled it open, and felt cold air rush up from below like breath from something alive. The stairs creaked under every step. The light, a single bulb on a pull chain, threw pale yellow across the space below. It was a standard Minnesota root cellar setup. Stone walls, dirt floor packed hard by decades of footsteps, old shelving units along one wall lined with mason jars of preserved vegetables, their contents gone grey and unidentifiable, a workbench along the other wall, An old coal furnace, long since replaced by electric heat upstairs, sitting cold and massive in the corner. Raymond started poking around. He wasn't sure what he was looking for. Old tools, maybe. Anything of value. He was moving a stack of cardboard boxes near the furnace when his boot heel came down differently. Not on packed dirt, on something hollow. He stopped. He pressed his foot down again. Same sound, a low, resonant thud that dirt doesn't make. Raymond got on his knees. He brushed at the dirt with his hands. Underneath, maybe an inch below the surface, he found wood, boards, fitted tightly together. He brushed more dirt away and found the edges of what appeared to be a hatch, maybe 4 feet by 4 feet, with a rusted iron ring set into the surface. His heart was doing something strange at this point, not quite racing, more like pausing, holding itself between beats, waiting. He grabbed the iron ring and pulled. The hatch didn't move. He pulled harder. Still nothing. He grabbed a flathead screwdriver from the workbench and worked it around the edges, breaking the seal of dirt and rust that had built up over years, maybe decades. He pulled again. This time, it gave. The hatch swung up on hinges that screamed with rust, releasing a smell that hit Raymond like a physical thing. Damp wood, old metal, something chemical he couldn't identify. Below the hatch was a space, not a crawl space, but a proper room, maybe 8 feet deep with rough wooden walls and a plank floor. Someone had built this deliberately. Someone had dug it out and lined it and sealed it and then covered it with dirt and moved a furnace in front of it and hoped, apparently, that no one would ever find it. Raymond lowered himself down. The room was small, maybe 10 feet by 8. In the beam of his flashlight, he saw wooden crates, stacked against 2 of the walls, floor to ceiling, maybe 20 crates in total. Old ones, reinforced with metal straps, padlocked. He tried the padlock on the nearest crate. It didn't budge. He went back upstairs, found a hammer and a chisel in Eleanor's toolbox, came back down, and went to work. The first padlock took him 6 minutes. He opened the lid of the crate. Inside, packed in tight rows, wrapped in wax paper that had yellowed and partially disintegrated, were bricks. Or what appeared to be bricks, rectangular, dense, dull yellow. Raymond picked one up. It was heavy in a way that felt unreasonable for its size. He turned it over in his hands. On one face, stamped into the surface, were numbers and a marking he did not immediately recognize. It took him a moment, and then it did not take him any longer. He was holding a gold bar. Now here is where I need you to stay with me, because what happened next is where the real story begins, not the discovery. The discovery was just the door. What came after was the room behind it. Raymond did not call the police. He did not call a lawyer. He sat down on the plank floor of that hidden room, in the cold and the dark, holding a gold bar in both hands, and he stayed there for a very long time. He was thinking about Eleanor. Eleanor Calloway, born Eleanor Hargrove in 1901 in a small town in northern Wisconsin. She had married his grandfather, Walter Calloway, in 1923. Walter had worked the iron mines, then the docks. He had died in 1967 before Raymond was born. Eleanor had lived alone in this house for 17 years after that. She had never seemed wealthy. She had clipped coupons from the Sunday paper. She had worn the same winter coat for 20 years. She had sent Raymond $5 in a birthday card every year until he stopped responding to them. She had lived on top of $100 million. Raymond knew enough, from news, from general knowledge, from the kind of information a smart working man absorbs over 31 years, to understand that gold had been rising sharply. In 1984, it was trading somewhere around $350 per troy ounce. He did not know exactly how many bars were in those crates, but he could feel, in some animal part of his brain, that what surrounded him in that room was not a small fortune. It was a generational one. Do you think you would have called the police immediately? Or would you have sat there in that room, in the cold, just thinking? Tell me in the comments. I want to know. Raymond spent the next 4 days in a state that he would later describe to the one person he eventually trusted as not quite real. He opened every crate, he counted. He documented everything with a camera he found in Eleanor's bedroom closet, a Kodak Instamatic with half a roll of film left. He found, in total, 214 gold bars of varying weight, plus 11 smaller crates containing silver coins, Morgan dollars, peace dollars, walking liberty halves, thousands of them, wrapped in cloth and packed in sawdust. He also found something else. In the last crate he opened, the one pushed farthest into the corner, the one that required him to move 3 other crates to reach, he found no gold. He found a metal box, the kind used for storing documents, about the size of a shoebox. Inside the box was a collection of papers, held together with a rubber band that crumbled when he touched it. Underneath the papers was a leather journal, cracked and stiff with age. The papers were receipts, transactions, dates stretching back to the 1930s, through the 1940s into the early 1950s, names Raymond didn't recognize, amounts that made no sense in the context of an iron country farmhouse. The receipts were not in Eleanor's handwriting. They were in Walter's, a hand Raymond had never seen in his life, but that he recognized as older, male, deliberate. The journal was Eleanor's. And this is where the story turns. Eleanor Calloway had known exactly what was in that basement. She had known since 1951, the year they moved to this house. She had known because Walter told her. Not everything, not the full story, not all at once, but enough. Enough for Eleanor to spend the next 33 years of her life carrying a secret that bent her, but did not break her. Walter Calloway, according to Eleanor's journal, had not made his money in the mines. He had made it during Prohibition. Not as a bootlegger, or not only as a bootlegger. Walter had been a courier and a keeper. He had worked for a network of men in the upper Midwest who moved money, cash, gold, silver, across the Canadian border and down through Minnesota, Wisconsin, and Michigan. Not drugs, not violence, just money. The unglamorous, essential work of moving wealth that certain men needed moved without government involvement. When the network dissolved in the late 1940s, when its leaders died or went to prison or simply disappeared, Walter had found himself in possession of a portion of the reserve that had never been claimed. He had waited, he had moved it, he had buried it. He had built a house over it and lived quietly for 2 decades, never spending a dollar of it, terrified that spending it would bring questions he couldn't answer. He had died in 1967, still terrified. Eleanor had inherited his fear along with his secret. She had lived the same way, quietly, frugally, speaking to no one about what lay beneath her feet. She had considered turning it in. The journal said so multiple times in entries spread across different years. She had considered it and turned away from it each time because she didn't know who to trust and didn't know what would happen to the money if she did. And so she had left it. She had left it to Raymond, not in a will, not with a note, not with an explanation, just left it the way you leave something when you've lived too long with it and no longer know what the right thing to do actually is. The last entry in Eleanor's journal was dated November 14th, 1983, 3 months before she died. It was 4 words. Raymond will figure it out. If you're still watching, do me a favor, subscribe right now, because what Raymond did next is the part nobody talks about, and I'm not done telling this story. Raymond left Duluth. He drove back to Chicago. He did not touch anything in the basement. He did not tell Dennis Pruitt, he did not tell his landlord. He paid his back rent in cash from savings he said he'd been holding. He asked for 2 weeks off work, unpaid. And he spent those 2 weeks doing something that a man with $11 in his account has almost no experience doing. He found a lawyer. Not just any lawyer. He looked for someone who handled estate law, who had experience with unusual asset situations, and who was not connected in any way to Duluth or to anyone Raymond knew. He found a man named Arthur Gillespie, practicing out of a two-room office in Evanston, Illinois. Raymond told him only part of the story, enough to get advice. Not enough to hand over control. Gillespie, to his credit, was direct. The legal status of assets recovered from inherited property was genuinely complex, he said. If the gold could be documented as having been in Walter's possession prior to certain legal thresholds, and if no existing claims could be identified, there was a reasonable path to legitimate ownership. It would require documentation, it would require patience, it would require not doing anything stupid. Raymond had already figured out the last part on his own. What followed was 14 months of careful, quiet work. Raymond made 3 more trips to Duluth. He removed the gold and silver in stages, transporting it in the back of a rented truck, wrapped in moving blankets, one section of crates at a time. He stored it in a climate-controlled facility outside the city under a business name he'd registered for $15 at the county clerk's office. He never told a single person in his personal life what he was doing. He kept working at the warehouse. He kept driving his truck with the cracked windshield. He ate the same meals, wore the same clothes, called his mother on Sundays the same as always. In April of 1985, after the legal process Gillespie had navigated on his behalf reached its conclusion, Raymond Calloway became the documented owner of assets valued, at that time, at just over $100 million. He did not buy a mansion. He did not buy a sports car. He did not move to a warm estate or throw a party or tell anyone at the warehouse. He did 3 things. First, he established a trust in Eleanor's name that funded scholarships for children in Duluth, kids from working families, kids who needed help getting to college the way Raymond had needed help getting to adulthood and hadn't gotten. He never put his name on the trust. He put Eleanor's. Second, he paid off every debt he had ever owed in full with interest, including debts most people would have considered long expired. A gas station in Wisconsin, a cousin in Detroit, a woman in Chicago who had lent him $60 back in 1979 and told him not to worry about it. He paid them all, with a handwritten note, no return address. Third, he went back to Eleanor's farmhouse one final time. He walked through every room. He stood in the kitchen for a long time, and then he went down into the basement, into the hidden room that now sat empty and swept clean, and he left one thing behind. Eleanor's journal, back in its metal box, back in the corner. He sealed the hatch. He covered it with dirt. He moved the boxes back into place. Some things Raymond had decided belonged to the house. What would you have done if you were Raymond? Would you have kept the secret or told someone immediately? Drop your answer in the comments, and if you made it all the way to the end of this story, you already know you belong here. Hit subscribe. There are more stories like this one waiting for you, and I promise you, none of them are what you expect.